Try saying that 3 times fast.
And we are based at the University of Iceland in Reykjavik, the School of Education, to be precise.
So we are going to talk about gamification for fun, engagement, and learning. Why is it saying it can't record?
Are you able to record? Because
it's already recording, I think.
It's already recording.
Is it?
I'm getting some sort of notifications.
Okay, yes, there is a notification. Yes, recording.
So are we recording?
Yes.
Okay.
very good.
Right, so we are going to talk about gamification for fun, engagement, and learning. And this session is meant to prepare you for the workshops in Florence. And what we'll be talking about is basically sort of the thinking behind the methods that we'll be engaging you in Florence to help you to take existing lesson plans and transform them with gamification to become engaging, and more fun. Fun is a key concept here. So, the first big question is, of course, what is a game? And, you know, we all know games. We've played games. We do a lot of that kind of stuff. But there are sort of formal definitions that highlight some of the things that really make a game a game. And we've included here one of the sort of better known formal definitions of a game. And what it really tells us is sort of that, and the important aspects of this are that when we have a game, the game consists of some key elements that make it a game rather than something else. And amongst those are that, you know, there are some sort of rules, and there is something that encourages players to pursue the game to get some sort of payback from it. That you know, they're not just going to play for the sake of playing, but there's something that keeps them going, something that motivates them. It can be winning the game, or it can be in the form of points, some sort of recognition, etc. But this is the essence of a game. There are rules. Game players sort of know what is expected of them, and they're pursuing something. Anything to add to that, Skulina?
No, I think you've got this right.
I'm right. One thing that we want to clarify just to begin with is the difference between gamified learning and game-based learning, because people often get this sort of confused. Gamified learning actually entails transforming learning into a game. Whereas game-based learning means that we use games along with learning. So for example, if we're using Monopoly to teach kids about money, that would be an example of game-based learning, right? When we're gamifying learning, where actually the learning process is integrated into a game that, you know, we may use a game that we get from somewhere, but the learning itself is a game. Okay.
Yeah, so we're aiming for inspiring students to be engaged and to have fun, creating some playful learning activities with gamified learning. And
just to confuse you a little bit more, that the distinction between game-based learning and gamified learning is not always entirely clear. There's a fuzzy line between there, but essentially we are talking about gamified learning rather than game-based learning. And so what we are really focusing on is how you actually transform your learning plans into novel games. right?
Or for teachers, even the lesson plans that you've created.
So gamifying learning, what it consists of essentially is using game design elements. We'll explain that a little more in a little while here, to change any sort of learning activities into engaging, playful games. And so in the lesson, both here during this session and also in Florence, the things that we're going to be covering is sort of introducing some examples of effective gamified learning, the importance of developing engaging storylines, which is really a key component of gamifying learning, and developing appropriate assessment strategies, because this can be very challenging when we transform learning into a game. How do we assess the learning? So essentially the methodology that we're going to be introducing here, what the key aspect of it is really taking sort of the learning outcomes that we've planned for in our learning plans and connecting those two game design elements to see how we can make learning more engaging and fun. Always important, the fun part. Anything to add to that?
No, I don't think.
Okay. So, what is it? Why do we want to gamify learning? And there are many reasons. Fun being an important one, but it's also because, one of the things that we see with really good games and well-designed games is how engaged players are. And particularly that in some games, the players will actually go to great extents, great lengths to play and to learn a game. And so that engagement and that dedication, that's often at a level that we teachers can only really allow ourselves to dream of. But what we want to do is to sort of tap into that and see, can we do what game designers do to make learning as engaging as the games that our students generally tend to play. And there are other things. There's that enhanced motivation. One of the important things as well is what we call here relatable outcomes, but essentially it is what relatable outcomes are. They have to do with the ability to connect what students are learning in classroom settings and traditional school-based settings, to connect that to their daily lives and sort of the world outside of school, right? So at this point, we want to invite you to, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, you can ask them now, but you can also write them in the chat window, and Schoolina is going to monitor that and collect the questions, and we can maybe respond to some of those later on. But at this point, does anyone have any questions, comments, something we need to explain a little in more detail? We have several slides to go.
Any thoughts that might occur, please let them come.
Yeah.
And someone can let me maybe into the meeting as well.
Yeah. So we have developed 2 handbooks to accompany this training session. And these are sort of the outcomes of our testing of the method in previous training sessions with the project. And these are available to you through the learning website that we have connected to these lessons. And there are 2 handbooks. So one is the learner's handbook and one is the trainer's handbook. And so the learner's handbook is probably where you want to start. I would recommend you start there. That this is about sort of where you learn about the method that we're going to be talking about and how you apply it and can apply it to your own lesson plans to gamify your lessons. And it includes worksheets at the end that you can use to sort of work out your thoughts and ideas and connect them. These worksheets are derived from an online tool that we have and that you will be introduced to in Florence. But the worksheets you can print off and use offline as well. So
you can start preparing. If you look at the last pages in the handbook, in the learner's handbook, you will find these worksheets.
And then the trainer's handbook, that's for people who will sort of be trying to teach their colleagues and others about these methods. So it contains pointers on, what you can do to sort of try to convey all of this interesting and fun information to your colleagues or whoever, and that sort of thing. So definitely do read through the learner's handbook before we get to Florence, and if you have time, you can look at the trainer's handbook as well. This is what the online tool looks like, and like I say, the worksheets are really simply copies of these, and this is divided into certain sections, certain steps in the game design process, that it goes from sort of identifying the anticipated learning outcomes, what we want our students to learn, connecting those two assessment strategies, and then connecting all of that to game design elements. And what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about some key game design elements, especially as they relate to gamifying learning. And so if I just go through these really quickly, it's framing the learning activity. That's where we connect the learning outcomes to the game design elements. Then we have what we call the metaphorical playground, where we try to stimulate our creative thoughts and bring some creativity into the process, to think of novel games and entertaining games. Then we define the game, and there are three key components that are in that process, which we'll talk about in a little while. Then we go into other game design elements, develop the basic rules for the game, and then we talk about what the end of the game looks like. What it is that is supposed to motivate our students, our game players? What is it that they're trying to strive to achieve at the end of the game? So like I say, that when we talk about game design elements, that this is something that game designers have developed in terms of how they design games, and we can find and produce lists with lots and lots and lots of game design elements, but what we want to focus on is just a few key components or design elements that are most important to gamifying learning, and they are essentially storylines, the rules, the control and interaction, what is it that game players are able to do, challenges and progression, what is it that motivates the players to carry on with the game, and sort of tries to make sure that they don't just quit halfway through and say, oh, this is boring. Then we have strategies, and finally the payoff, which is essentially what the end of the game is. And it can be winning, it can be something else. We'll get into that more in a little while.
Yeah, so we want to show you this model of game taxonomy categories and attributes. It's developed by Salt Ola. He's an Intel analyst, but he's based it on an article by Bedwell et al. About these game attributes. And he shared this at the conference in 21 and talked about the taxonomy categories and attributes, that they help deconstruct and analyze games. The tool enables, in other words, learning designers to play games deliberately for learning rather than simply for fun. So we're trying in a way to connect these elements. It could prove useful for our purposes in that we can consider the individual categories and their attributes to seek inspiration for how you would like to develop your ideas about gamification and how you can make them work to the advantage of your students. For instance, can you fantasize about how you can connect to the learning objectives and gamification or storyline? Can you specify the degree of interaction and agency your students can have in your gamification exercise? This is important. Will any conflict or changes you set up in your gamification possibly advance your students when they are climbing up the learning curve and enable them to get to the next level? I mean, these questions could maybe trigger off some thoughts. And if you look at the attributes surrounding this circle with the main categories, then you might be able to align them with your learning objectives that you're trying to get across.
So to take a quick look at some of these key game design attributes or the game design elements, that we always start with a storyline. That this is sort of where we describe what the game is about. And even the most simple games, that they are based on a storyline. We don't always think about what that storyline is, but there is some storyline there. And even if we think of the simple game of tag, there is that storyline about, being it. And as it would be said in English, and, no one wants to be it. So there's a storyline there about avoiding being it. Right, but and like I say, this is a very simple storyline, but there's always some sort of storyline underlying the game, and the storyline sort of, it can either be, we can derive a storyline or create a storyline, but it tells us what the game is about, and to have a game that, so that the players know what they're expected to do, there has to be that storyline. So we start off with developing what the basic plot of the game is. And then we have different types of storylines. So we can have storylines that are entirely made up at the start. This is very often the case, for example, with board games. That board games are dictated by rules. The rules are written in the rule book, and you're not supposed to make up things as you go along. But sometimes, especially like if we're doing some sort of role-playing games or that sort of thing, then we might actually want to give the players some sort of flexibility regarding the storyline, and so we can have player-generated storylines. And this is, for example, often the case in role-playing games, that if we think of things like Dungeons and Dragons, that very popular role-playing game, that often the person who is actually creating the game and running
sorry
the game,
to interrupt. I think there are some people that need to be admitted. Can you check?
Yeah. Are we supposed to be doing that, or other?
Yes, I think you are assigned as host.
Ah, right.
But you can make me or Claudia or whatever.
Yes,
whoever.
if you prefer, you can make Iphigenia host or
Host. Make co-host at least.
Yeah, I'll make Claudia a co-host, and
thank you, and sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. But as the image on the side there sort of dictates, it can be useful to prepare some steps with the storyline. Think about the concept, define the different parts of it. You can even write some text, and you can assemble some visuals that you want to use. You can review what you have been thinking about, and so on. And then you could even, share it with others and ask them to help you evaluate. And we might do this in the workshop in Florence, actually.
So that's essentially the storylines that tell us what, why we're playing the game and what we're supposed to be doing. The second concept that is very important is, of course, what we call the control and interaction, which is basically the rules of the game and what tools we use to play the game. And so, for example, in many games, we use dice. That is a control and interaction mechanism. In computer games, we often use sort of controllers. So that is a control and interaction. But it's not just those devices that we use to play the games, but it's also the rules themselves. So if we have a rule that, say that we're playing tag and we say you have to be running when you're tagging someone, that becomes a control and interaction element. So, and the basic rule of that, tag someone in the game of tag, you touch them. That is a control and interaction. That is a basic rule of the game. And without those kinds of rules and those control and interaction elements, then we essentially don't have a game because people don't know what to do or that they're going to play by different rules, which can get very confusing. The challenges and progression is very important. That certainly within games that we have usually have an end goal, right? The players are striving towards some end in which they either win or collect something that is of value, etc. But between the start of the game and the end of the game, we have to have something that keeps our players going. And that's where challenges and progression come in. And so with these kinds of games, we try to make sure that we have sort of points within the game where players need to achieve something, to go to a next stage, which advances them towards that winning stage. And these are the challenges in progression.
Mm-hmm. And preferably something that excites them and sort of triggers some interest.
Yeah. So also another thing that we do to try to maintain the player's interest is to introduce elements that allow them to strategize on their own terms, right? That they can create some sort of approaches within the game that they use to increase the likelihood that they're going to win. So if we relate it again to the game of tag, let's say one player develops a strategy that they are it, but they decide to hide the fact that they are it so they can get close to someone. And then they'll just touch them and, oh, now you're it. That would be a strategy. And so we want to give players opportunities to develop those kinds of strategies because that is a very motivating factor for them to think about how they can try to use their own ideas and their own wit and smarts to get ahead in the game.
Yeah, so it's a question of agency and participation, sort of the interaction between that.
So ultimately, the final goal is what we call the payoff. What is it that game players are really striving for throughout the entire process of playing the game? And these are very important motivators because if there's nothing at the end of the game, then why are we going to play the game, right? Often, the payoff is simply winning, but it doesn't necessarily have to be winning. It can be a lot of different things: rewards, points, badges, etc. Can be very motivating, or just as motivating as winning a game.
Γεια σας. Ναι,
So,
ναι. Δεν πειράζει, δεν πειράζει. Είμαι σε σεμινάρ. Α, εντάξει.
so the really important
πειράζει.
thing with the method that we'll be working with you with in the workshops is connecting these key game design elements to the learning elements that we are, used to working with as teachers. We're used to thinking about ways that we engage our students. We think about how communication occurs within learning environments. To think about the agency of the students. That how do we connect those to specific game design elements so that our games don't just become about the games, but are actually functioning as learning tools. Because one of the sort of worst things we can do is to try to gamify learning, and it ends up that the game takes over the learning processes. And we want to avoid that at all costs. Now, in this context, I've often shared a personal story that when I was a kid, that one of my teachers introduced sort of a reading competition, and we would get stars for each book that we read. And myself and another student, we ended up sort of in a one-on-one competition in this to be always at the top of the readers list with the most stars. And at one point, I was starting to fall behind. And so I ended up cheating and actually said that I'd read a book that I hadn't read. And and there, so this would be an example of a relatively poorly designed game, because there the game really took over the learning aspects. And so that's what we want to avoid. So that's why we want to have clear connections between the game design elements and the learning elements that that we're working with. And that's what our approach is particularly oriented toward. So, any questions, comments yet? Nothing?
Something that comes to mind?
So, yes, Iphigenia. So again, it's for any subject, any topic, right?
Well, I think both of us would say that yes, you should be able to gamify any sort of learning. That it's not bound to any certain topic, and because it's really about focusing on the anticipated learning outcomes and thinking about just how you use those game design elements to increase the engagement and fun with those. So it's not specific to any subject. And certainly I think any subject can be gamified, but it requires the insight of the teacher, of course, that the teacher, this is something that especially experienced teachers would be very comfortable with. I would hope that that thinking about how they can sort of transform the process of achieving the learning outcomes into something that that builds on those game design elements. Yeah.
I see. Thank you.
And so, just to, because, sometimes we get questions about this, that some of the questions we've gotten, in other sessions or elsewhere is, for example, what sorts of games this is about. Is it about computer games? Is it about board games? That again is entirely open. That's really, when we're talking about gamifying learning, that it's not bound to specific types of games. It can be pretty much anything. And like I say, if we think about a game like tag, it's something that requires nothing but a group of children. And so it can be that kind of game. It could also be a board game, definitely. And even so, once we're familiar with this notion of gamification and especially the difference between gamification and game-based learning, that we could even think about how we could use games that exist, that someone else has designed, as platforms for gamifying our own learning, right? That's always a possibility as well, and that's sort of an example of that fuzzy line that I talked about, which separates gamification and game-based learning. Yeah.
So just to take it from there, so if we have a game that exists, let's say a board game like Monopoly, then through this method, we can adapt, we can take some elements and we can adapt it to make our lesson on any subject gamified.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one approach that I've read about in sort of some of the literature is using existing board games but making up new rules, right? That there's nothing that says that you have to play by the rules that they print on the box, but you can make up your own. And even, I mean, Monopoly is an interesting example because it is a game that started out as one thing and was transformed into something entirely different. Because originally it was developed as a game that was supposed to teach children about the evils of property owners that manipulated renters and that sort of thing. And it became all of a sudden a game about promoting capitalism. And so it was actually initially developed by a woman who was a radical socialist.
Really?
Yes.
But I think you could also think about this, if you think about it with relation to subjects. I mean, there are a lot of concepts that might be tricky to understand. And it's maybe a matter of imagination, of finding out how you can make them more understandable and adaptable to understanding with gamification. And you can also think about gamifying that something that is cross-disciplinary. Doesn't have to be based on subjects.
Corinne, you have your hand up.
Yes.
You have a question?
Yes, hello. Thank you for the presentation. I'd like to ask you, what are we going to do in Florence? We're going to create our own game based on gamified learning, or the game-based learning, or both?
No, we are going to be focusing entirely on gamification, right? So that's really, we are not doing game-based learning. We are doing gamification. But for Florence, what the plan is, and what we've sort of, at least the information that we've asked to have conveyed to the participants, is that people come to the session with a lesson plan that they have developed for their normal teaching. Then the participants will work in groups. They will select one of the lesson plans, and then they will work from that lesson plan to gamify it, going through those steps that are illustrated by the worksheets in the handbook.
So, along with our luggage, we are bringing a lesson plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, preferably, yeah. But or I mean, basically our idea, and we also want people to show up with their own computers or tablet computers or that sort of thing. So I'm thinking that you could just have your lesson plan on a drive on your computer, so that it doesn't make for any extra luggage.
Certainly not. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to meeting you there in Florence with my lesson plan.
Likewise.
So any other questions or comments? Then I think we are nearing our finish here, right? We had one slide left. That was So finally, just to cover the last bit of this, that and this will be part of the process that we will be going through in Florence, is thinking about how we assess the learning that goes on in gamified learning, because that can actually be a very tricky challenge, because like we've talked about, that when we're gamifying our lessons and our learning, that we use various things to motivate our students, right? Strategies and payoffs and all of that kind of stuff. But the thing is that those are not assessments, and that's really a key point to keep in mind, that the points earned, the badges earned, or winning the game is not an assessment. So we have to be very clear about how we assess the learning that we wanted to go on, right? The anticipated learning outcomes that we started with. How do we expect those to appear in the gameplay, and how will our students provide some sort of documentation of the learning that went on,
Or demonstrations.
or demonstrate the learning that went on in the game, right? Are we done?
I think.
Yeah. Then we just had, just to point out again, the resources that are on the website. So we both have a resource list with some links to further information about gamification, especially gamification, how it relates to learning. And then we remind you about the worksheets in the handbook, in the learner's handbook. Definitely familiarize yourselves with those. And then we have an extensive bibliography for those who really want to dive deep into the topic of gamification.